Good morning and welcome to the first hearing for the task force.
Oh, I just realized that my microphone was off, so I just wanted to say hi, it's me, Mrs. Dave the lawyer. Happy Sunday. Thank you so much for joining me today on this stream. We are streaming the House Oversight Committee from last week, a Medicaid fraud hearing. And actually, I believe it was from the first week of June, but let's get this started.
On, again, defending constitutional rights and exposing institutional abuses. America's Medicaid system was designed to provide health care for low-income Americans. Unfortunately, as reporting from Luke Rosiak at the Daily Wire has recently revealed, fraudsters and cheats are stealing billions in hard-earned American tax dollars. This is something we've seen before, unfortunately. Just a couple months ago, the House Oversight Committee examined a similar problem in Minnesota where Somali fraudsters stole over $16 billion from American taxpayers. Today, we're going to be focusing on Ohio, which appears in many ways quite similar. Ohio broadened its Medicaid program through home and community-based services, or HCBS waivers, authorized under the Social Security Act. HCBS waivers allow states to provide home-based health care as opposed to providing health care in hospitals or other institutions. But these waivers also allow states to cover non-medical personal care services such as cooking and cleaning, as well as companionship and conversation. The problem is that fraudsters are billing Medicaid for personal care services that were never actually provided in many cases. Here's how it works. A fraudster finds an elderly person in Ohio, oftentimes a family member, who he believes will qualify for federally funded home health services. The fraudster then gets a note from a doctor which vouches for the elderly person's supposed needs. Because the fraudster is unequipped to deal directly with the Medicaid bureaucracy, he contracts with a home health business who acts as an intermediary between himself and the federal government. The business then facilitates Medicaid payments from the taxpayer to the fraudster while taking a cut off of the top. In the personal care Medicaid waiver program in Ohio alone, taxpayers have lost an estimated $1.2 billion due to fraud. $1.2 billion of hard-earned American tax dollars are now in the hands of criminals. So who are these fraudsters? Well, just like in Minnesota, many of them are Somali. There are an estimated 60,000 Somalis living in Ohio right now. That means that Ohio is the second largest Somali population in America, second only to Minnesota. In addition to Somali fraudsters, Ohio is home to the largest population of Bhutanese immigrants in America. Recent reporting shows that many of the Somali and Bhutanese communities commit a large portion, if not the majority, of home health Medicaid fraud in Ohio. That may not be the politically correct thing to say, but we believe that is the truth. So what do we know about these businesses that are facilitating Medicaid fraud? Thanks to Rosiak's investigative reporting, we know quite a bit. They oftentimes have names like Capital Home Health, Continental Home Health, Dynamic Home Health Care, or Ohio Senior Home Health Care, or some derivation of a similar name. Many of them operate out of largely abandoned, often windowless buildings like the one at 6161 Bush Boulevard, which is home to 94 different companies that have recently billed Medicaid $66 million. There have also been multiple reports of other abandoned buildings, companies sharing the same address, and corporate names that are identical. Indeed, many of these companies appear virtually indistinguishable from one another. They don't advertise themselves, they charge the same rates, and offer no clear explanation of how they even acquired large numbers of patients, often seemingly overnight. So I think what the American people would like to better understand, and one of the purposes of this hearing, is why was this allowed to happen? Of course, part of the answer is in fact immigration. The reality is that America wouldn't have a problem with Somali and Bhutanese fraud if we didn't import large numbers of Somali and Bhutanese people. That's a fact. This appears to be the tip of the iceberg of a gross abuse of America's immigration system. For too long, our government allowed foreigners from low-trust societies with very little vetting to pour into our communities. Now, as elected officials, we can't stand idly by as these fraudsters exploit our welfare system and get rich off of American taxpayers, and we can't back down to fraud simply because of spurious accusations of racism. Secondly, as we'll discuss, we have a problem with verifying the integrity of America's welfare programs. Programs like the electronic visit verification system, including its GPS tracking system, were not properly utilized. That means that in many cases, we can't even verify if any of the billed home health services were even provided. In many cases, family members are billing Medicaid for alleged services provided to their own relatives. At the same time, we've seen billboards in Columbus advertise that people can get paid for caring for a loved one at home. The result is that fraudsters and fraudulent home health businesses are stealing massive sums of money by abusing and defrauding federal Medicaid. This isn't just about safeguarding our constituents' hard-earned tax dollars, but it's also about saving our society from fraudsters and cheats and protecting the availability of critical programs for the American people. According to Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services Administrator Oz, half of all fraud in federal government programs is in health care. He recently revealed that eliminating fraud in Medicare alone would double the life expectancy of the Medicare Trust Fund without any other legislative fixes. The purpose of this hearing is to better understand the nature, scale, and scope of Medicaid fraud in Ohio, to understand why it happened, and to better understand who is responsible. I want to thank our witnesses for appearing today on this important topic. And with that, I'd like to yield to Ranking Member Simon for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for our witnesses and members of the public for attending today. This is the first hearing convened by the Task Force on Defending Constitutional Rights and Exposing Institutional Abuses. And I have to say, if this hearing is any indication of what this task force intends to do, I think the American people have reason to be a bit concerned because they are being gaslit. Families across the country are struggling to afford rent, they are struggling to afford groceries, they are struggling to afford health care, and they are struggling to afford child care. And many, particularly our elders, are wondering how they're going to retire one day. Seniors are worried about the future of Medicare and Social Security. Our disabled populations are fighting every day to access the care for the services that they need to live. And yet we're here. We're here having this conversation. Republicans have called this hearing on universal basic fraud. But before we've heard a single witness, and again, thank you all for being here, before we have received a single finding, the conclusion has already been written. The premise is that the public benefit programs are inherently suspect, and that the people who rely on them should be viewed with both skepticism and distrust rather than compassion, and I wholeheartedly and forcefully reject this premise. Now, let me be clear, and I want this to be heard again.
So I don't think that that's true whatsoever. I think that the statement she's making is really just deflecting from the actual facts of what this hearing is about. And this hearing is very much needed, but there's so much more to it than just the topic that they're going to be discussing during this hearing. So first of all, there is a lot of Medicaid fraud. And not all of that fraud, in my opinion, is due to individuals doing something wrong or trying to scam the system. In my opinion, a big piece of the fraud is the government does not have, I don't know what the word would be, but from department to department, they don't have that synergy to oversee everything that's going on like you think that they should. And I can give you guys an example later on. But fraud hurts everybody in the system. It's just a waste. Nobody should be getting more than somebody else. And certainly we should not reward people that are like faking invoices or, billing Medicaid for services that were not performed. And the reality is that does go on, and it goes on sometimes egregiously in certain communities. I don't think anything that Congressman Gill said, stated, or even insinuated that people that need government benefits are bad or should be shamed or anything like that. That never came up whatsoever. If anything, he addressed the situation that maybe we have an immigration problem and that's why this massive fraud has occurred. But let's continue.
Loud and clear, fraud should and must be investigated. Inefficient systems must be addressed. Bad actors should be held accountable wherever they exist. But one bad actor, even a few bad actors, don't and should never define an entire program. Millions, and we mean millions, of Americans rely on Medicaid. Seniors rely on it. Disabled folks rely on it. Working families rely on it. Caregivers rely on it. And as somebody, me, who's cared for a terminally ill person, the person that I love most in the world, my husband, we received and got a ton of community support, including home health. I know that these services are not just lifelines, but they're often the difference between stability and literal crisis.
And I actually believe everything she's saying is true, and I agree with her. I agree with her that certain people rely on these benefits and need these benefits and should have access to these benefits. Somebody that served our country in the military and is disabled, they rely on these benefits. They should get these benefits. Or, let's say you've worked all your life and you run into hard times and you need to apply for Medicaid. I think that you should get that. There's no shame in that. You've paid into the system. You have a hardship. You, as an American citizen, you have a right to those benefits. So I agree with her. I agree that these benefits are needed. But the whole point of this hearing and what Congressman Gill was trying to say is that we have to eliminate the fraud and the wasteful spending so people can actually get these benefits that need them. And that's the whole point of this. There are people out there that are getting rejected from these systems because we don't have enough money to serve them because so much of our money is going to fraud.
Well, what concerns me most is that too often conversations like this one are not actually about accountability. They become the justification for gutting the social safety net that Americans have paid into. They become a justification for making it harder for people to access care, the people that we care most about. They become the justification for undermining programs that millions of people depend on each and every day, and they become the justification for subjugating entire classes of people. Yes, subjugating entire classes of people. So if Republicans are truly concerned about fraud and waste, then we, as a body, should be willing to apply that standard consistently. We and my Republican colleagues should be willing to explain why they have pursued the largest cuts to Medicaid in American history while supporting and funding an illegal and immoral war in a ballroom at the White House. The question before us is not whether fraud should be addressed. It should be the question of why my colleagues are spending our time tearing down a program that helps real people, the sick, the disabled, the elderly, instead of addressing the high cost and conditions that families in this country are dealing with on a daily basis. I hope today's hearing focuses on solutions. And Mr. Chairman, I hope we can distinguish between isolated instances of wrongdoing, real wrongdoing, and the millions of people who rely on these services in good faith. And I hope that we remember that protecting the integrity of Medicaid ultimately lifts up and benefits all Americans. All Americans. Thank you. And I yield back. And actually, I would love to enter unanimous consent.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent that Representatives Brown, Landsman, and Sykes of Ohio be allowed to participate in today's hearing.
So again, I actually do agree with a lot of what she said. I think that we need to have solutions. And again, I think that our government has done a really poor job in preventing fraud. And I think that they go after the wrong people and they miss like these hugely egregious fraudulent cases like what we saw in Minnesota that would never have come out if it wasn't for Nick Shirley. And now, you know, they've investigated Ohio. But why did Nick Shirley have to bring this up and get the internet on fire to make Congress do something? Like, why did like a 21-year-old or however old he is, why did like a young adult have to search this himself to get anybody to pay attention to it? Like, we would not be listening to this hearing if it wasn't for Nick Shirley. And that is really troubling to me because I know the Justice Department puts out, you know, all of these press releases that they're going after Medicare and Medicaid fraud for this and that and whatnot. But like, how could they miss something this so big and so egregious that is very isolated also? That to me is what's troubling. But what I disagree with this speaker is that we should just not even have this hearing whatsoever because people need Medicaid. No, we need to have this hearing. We need to listen to the facts, and we do need to resolve these things. I also don't think that we necessarily need to cut anything. We just need to cut the fraud. And if we can get rid of the fraud, then we can help more Americans. And that's what Medicaid is about.
I will, in fact, object to that. We've discussed through the staff earlier that we're not having waive-ons for this hearing.
Well, and I understand that, but what's really important, I would like to ask the question of why. I have a parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Chairman. This hearing is about Ohio. Ohio Democrats asked to waive on, and we were told by committee Republicans that they could. And just yesterday, we were told at the last minute that you're no longer allowing Ohio members to participate in a hearing about Ohioans. I would love to ask why. So, Mr. Chairman, what is the reason for your refusal to allow Ohioans who are representing their people to participate in today's hearing?
I mean, waive-ons are at the discretion of the chair, and we've decided that it's going to be best if we keep this hearing limited to just the members of the chair, but appreciate the inquiry.
But Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Mr. Chairman, I'm confused because we have members who are elected by the people of Ohio who sit on the Oversight Committee and other members of Congress.
And they
have
could have been
asked
added to this committee. So
well, you actually
they
said
could
yes.
have been added to the
Mr. Chairman,
committee.
yesterday you asked.
Nope,
you said
we're
that they
keep this
could.
even, so we're going to move on, and I'd like to briefly
That's extremely
recognize.
unfortunate.
Chairman, if I may,
Jordan here.
parliamentary inquiry, please.
Sure.
As the one
The gentlelady is not recognized. No.
as
I
the
recognize Mr.
one
Jordan.
member
The gentlelady
of the
is not
Democratic
recognized.
member of Ohio on this committee,
The gentlelady is not recognized.
I'm on the committee. Why are you not allowing me to speak as a member of the committee, the committee of the
You're not
whole?
on this task force. You're not recognized. Move on. Now recognize Mr. Jordan very briefly.
I think the chairman, I just wanted to welcome, I've been in Congress a few years, and I don't know if we've ever had a hearing where we had three folks from our great state testifying, folks that I don't know the Honorable Ms. Antonio, but do know Mr. Davila, and of course I've known Mr. Faber for a long time. They've served our state well, and we appreciate that. In fact, I think auditor is actually stuck with me as his member of Congress. So God bless you for putting up with me. But we want to welcome the folks from Ohio. Appreciate you being here today. And of course, we welcome Mr. Rosiak as well. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And now I'd like to welcome our witnesses. Thank you all for taking the time to be here. First, we have Luke Rosiak. Luke is an investigative reporter for the Daily Wire. Mr. Rosiak broke the story on Medicaid HCBS, the waiver program in Ohio. So thank you for being here. Next, we have Keith Faber. He's the Ohio State Auditor. Mr. Faber took office in 2019. Under his leadership, his office has conducted audits identifying improper and fraudulent Medicaid billing. Next, we have Michael Davila, a member of the Ohio House of Representatives from the 17th District. Mr. Davila served for years previously in the legislature, but most recently took office in 2025 and serves as the vice chairman of the Ohio House Finance Committee. He's an outspoken critic of Medicaid fraud and an advocate for oversight and reforms. Finally, we have Nikki Antonio, state senator for Ohio's 23rd Senate District. Senator Antonio has been in office since 2019 and serves as Ohio's Senate Minority Leader. Thank you all for joining us, and I very much look forward to your testimony. Pursuant to Committee Rule 9G, the witnesses will please stand and raise their right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony that you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record show that the witnesses answered in the affirmative. Thank you. You can take a seat. We appreciate you being here today, and I look forward to all of your testimonies. Let me remind the witnesses that we will have read your written statement in full, and it will appear in full in the hearing record. Please limit your oral statements to 5 minutes. As a reminder, please press the button on the microphone in front of you so that it is on and the members can hear you. When you begin to speak, the light in front of you will turn green. After 4 minutes, the light will turn yellow. When the red light comes on, your 5 minutes will have expired, and we will ask you to please wrap up. With that said, we'll begin with your testimonies, and I'd like to recognize Luke Rosiak for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Gill, Ranking Member Simon, task force members. It's an honor to be with you to discuss the Daily Wire's investigation into Medicaid home health waiver fraud. The federal government built a program so easy to game that a convicted fraudster can get approved to send unsupervised and untrained workers into elderly Americans' homes, and a refugee family can collect $90,000 a year simply by having one family member claim to be the other's caregiver, with no verification and little oversight. Medicaid calls this personal services home health care, and my investigation found millionaire tax cheats, almost all of them foreign-born, ripping off taxpayers at a scale that threatens to bankrupt America. We all have families, all of us have parents that'll get old, and yet in some states, Medicaid will pay you simply for being a normal person, as a home health aide whose job it is to provide cooking, cleaning, or just companionship and conversation to your own family member. The federal government has agreed to give waivers to certain states, letting them run these programs, even though 70% of that cost is paid by the feds. This was something that was sold to us as saving money because it would be used as an alternative to nursing homes.
Okay, so I know that this is going to be an unpopular opinion, but if these states created this program and allowed people to collect this money, and the only criteria was they had to have an elderly person in the home that they took care of, then is it really fraud? Is it their fault? Like I said, I know that that's probably an unpopular opinion, and I know that there's a lot of viewers that born and raised in America and would never in a million years ever apply for these programs. They just wouldn't. They just have too much pride, and they would just take care of their families and not try to get government money out of it. And I think that's what makes people great here in America, because we have a lot of hard workers and you don't want to waste our government's money. But my point is, if this program was legal, And these immigrants were just following the protocols that they were told they could legally do. That's not really on them. They're not really scamming the system. And that's on our government and our lawmakers and the people running these programs. And I think it's really crappy. Then we're going to go blame it on like a subset of people and then try to villainize immigrants. I don't think that's right. Now, I don't know if that's what's going on in this situation. Like what we saw in Minnesota was just very egregious fraud, where they were setting up these leering centers and there was no kids in the building, and they were blatantly just billing for kids that probably didn't even exist. So that, in my opinion, is like true fraud that needs to be prosecuted, that needs to be addressed. But on the other hand, if there's a program that was set up and people are just doing what the guidelines and the criteria is, that's not really fraud. But the other thing to just keep in mind, and again, I'm just playing devil's advocate here, the government has a very broad definition of waste and fraud. It's a very gray area in a lot of industries, especially in Medicare and Medicaid billing. And if you really study and read the laws, and I actually have, like anything could be considered fraudulent, really. And that's not a good thing either. We really need our government to define exactly what people can and cannot do to receive these benefits. It needs to be very clear, very interpretable. Because if you want somebody to follow the law, you need to make it simple and easy to follow. But again, we'll see as this hearing goes on. But just from, the few people that we've heard so far, it sounds to me that the state of Ohio set up this program and people were following the guidelines to get this money legally. And if that is the case, then I think we need to leave them alone. Like, we can't say that that's fraudulent, they did something illegal, because they didn't. They were just following the guidelines. Now, on the other hand, we could consider getting rid of this program, that's fine, but I don't think any individual should be penalized because the government created a crappy program. Let me know in the comments what you think.
But it didn't work out that way. A lot more people started claiming to be sick when there was a financial benefit to their family for being sick. And so this program has more than doubled in cost in just the last few years. The number of people doing this in some communities has become so large that you can see it in aggregate job statistics. The state of California recently reported gaining jobs. Well, it actually lost jobs unless you count the people that are getting paid by the government to take care of their own family members. In New York State, it is the most common job now of any profession to be a home health aide. That's the scale we're talking about here. Now, in February, HHS released data listing corporations that are paid by Medicaid. By far, the largest billing code is personal services at $140 billion over the last several years. Personal services is the medical jargon for stuff that isn't medical at all. It's these housekeepers and people providing conversation and companionship. I did some data analysis to identify suspicious patterns. The data immediately pointed me to Columbus, Ohio. It turns out you can drive down the street in parts of Northeast Columbus, and every single building is basically a home health care provider. One building had 94 businesses inside that billed a combined $66 million to taxpayers. I began looking up these companies in public records, and what I found was really shocking. Many of the owners, maybe most of them, had other full-time jobs. This was a side hustle for them to get a couple $1,000,000, sometimes a year, sometimes a month, from Medicaid. A lot of times they had tax liens against them. They were getting all this money from taxpayers, and yet they weren't paying their own taxes. They oftentimes, or sometimes, had criminal records. True Home Healthcare is run by a man with 3 fraud convictions and by his wife, who has 3 theft convictions. A nice couple there. When I asked him basic questions about what his business did, you know what he did? He threatened my family. These are the kind of people that our government pays to go into the homes of little old ladies where anything could happen. They're inside private residences. And the same reason is it makes it so hard to prevent fraud in this program, because it's very hard to show that somebody actually went to the private residence that they.
I disagree. I don't think it's hard to show proof. It's actually quite easy nowadays. It's 2026. Everybody has a smartphone. It is extremely easy to show proof. And I'll give you guys an example. You know, my background, I have a master's in psychology, and I used to work for the state as a master's level clinician. And, you know, over the years, I've also worked for various like telehealth companies doing mental health care. Anyways, one of the last company I worked for, they billed Medicaid for our services. And one of the things that we had to do as clinicians is we had to prove that we had either a telephone call or a video call with that person, or we would not receive payment because they wanted to minimize any type of Medicaid fraud. So if I had a telephone session with somebody and I billed for an hour, I had to show proof, like take a screenshot and show proof that I spoke with that person for an hour, or I would not get paid for that. They were not going to bill Medicaid unless they had proof. So I disagree with him. I don't think that it's difficult nowadays to show proof. I think it's actually easier than ever.
Said they were. Other times it seems when the business is not in the name of a criminal, it's oftentimes seems like it was put in a straw owner's name. There was an example where Omega Home Health Services was incorporated by the wife of a felon who had previously been convicted of ripping off the federal government by giving out these fake, non-existent services to old people. So he gets caught, and then his wife creates a company doing the same thing, and the federal government says, yeah, that's fine, have $6 million. There's a company that was founded on paper by a teenager, and the teenager turned out to be the son of a convicted money launderer. And so, you know, you can think maybe the teenager wasn't actually the one running this company. Only after my database queries highlighted the abnormalities in Columbus did I learn that there was another similarity to Minnesota. Columbus contained the second largest concentration of Somalis in the US, as well as the largest concentration of Bhutanese people outside of Bhutan. Now, I visited hundreds of home healthcare companies and only saw, I think, 2 people that didn't have an accent. Whistleblowers in the area tell me companies knock on doors in ethnic neighborhoods where most people are on Medicaid and most people live in multi-generational households. And they tell the older family member to go to particular doctors and claim particular symptoms. And then they will put the younger family member on their payroll with the parent as their only patient. Now that triggers payments of up to $90,000 a year, which the company splits with the younger relative, and the younger relative splits with the older relative. 81% of Bhutanese are on welfare, a fact that some of the remainder use to become obscenely rich. And I had a story just yesterday. A 29-year-old named Rashan Adkihari works at his dad's home healthcare company. His social media documents a life fit for a rapper or a movie star. He's drinking champagne on private jets. He's on his yacht. He's making movies starring himself. This was funded. His dad has this company that was paid $17 million for taking care of old people. Well, he's got apparently another full-time job. He's doing this on the side. The dad hasn't paid taxes in like 5 years. He's got tax liens in Ohio at the state level and at Cuyahoga County. And the 25-year-old brother has his own home health care company that got $10 million. So these are people that came here as refugees, and now they're living as millionaires, and they're getting the money because the other refugees are all on Medicaid and then are claiming to be very sick. Any private nurse, you don't even have to be a doctor, can sign off on somebody being so sick, and that's, I think, at the root of the problem here, is we have people claiming to be eligible for this program who really shouldn't be. Companies are committing fraud by paying kickbacks for no-show jobs. The patients are committing fraud, but we're just beginning to look into the root of the monster, the network of doctors who rubber stamp this fraud. That's a criminal enterprise that I think
Regular
Congress
order.
should
I mean, I know I'm not waved on to the committee, but this is ridiculous.
And
As the
you are
person
not
from
recognized. You're not on
Ohio,
this
as a person
committee at
from
all.
Ohio
This
and
is
who
not your
cannot
committee.
speak, and you're just
You're
gonna
not
let them-
recognized.
Please.
I would ask
You are not
myself to be
recognized.
recognized, that we
This
have
is
regular
absolutely
order
absurd.
for, I would ask to
Mr.
be
Rosiak is
recognized.
finishing up his time. You got
Correct.
5 seconds to finish.
Just my 5 seconds, I would love to take.
And we'll give your side.
Is I just
as
would
well.
love, because you've gone over a minute, for the rest of the witnesses to have the same ability to speak.
You are not recognized. You're not recognized. We're gonna move
I
on.
hope you're going to be fair in this hearing.
We will be fair. I now
Just remember what I always say. The left incriminates themselves by accusing the right of what they're doing. So I want you guys to listen to where the left is getting upset. Listen to what they're accusing the right of doing in this hearing, because that's going to help you uncover what the left is actually doing. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I don't know why this was so offensive, what he was saying, the story that he was telling, how this could in any way be offensive to the left. To me, hearing this, it's very shocking that this has gone on, and it's very troubling that we have people that are convicted felons making millions of dollars from Medicaid, and this has been allowed for years by the state and the federal government. But let's continue.
Recognize Auditor of the State, Keith Faber, for his opening statement.
Well, thank you, Chairman Gill, Ranking Member Simon, and members of the task force. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today regarding fraud, risk, and oversight concerns with Medicaid. As Ohio's Auditor of State, my office is responsible for ensuring taxpayer dollars are spent legally, transparently, and efficiently. American taxpayers do not care whether dollars originate from the federal government or the state. They simply know that it's their money, and they don't want it stolen, wasted, or abused. Since taking office, my administration has worked aggressively to identify fraud, waste, and abuse, and control failures. To date, we've identified more than $9 billion in unsupported or fraudulent public expenditures, with Medicaid and unemployment programs representing the two largest areas of concern. As auditor, my office has secured convictions in more than 164 public officials, while also expanding fraud reporting initiatives, fraud awareness campaigns, and cybersecurity training efforts. Most recently, my office is engaged with our federal partners on public benefits fraud, including participation in the Vice President's task force here in Washington. Earlier this year, when significant Medicaid concerns surfaced in Ohio, we quickly shared our findings with the federal partners to help inform broader oversight and enforcement efforts. But our work has not stopped at the federal level. Over the last several months, I have testified multiple times before the Ohio General Assembly, repeatedly raising these concerns, outlining the weaknesses our audits and reviews have identified, and urging lawmakers to strengthen oversight, accountability, and fraud prevention across the Medicaid program. There is one point I want to make clear. Our role as auditors is not to administer the Medicaid programs or adjudicate eligibility decisions. We audit government and look for control weaknesses. It is the benefit agency's responsibility to detect and identify individual beneficiary waste, fraud, and abuse. Our role is to identify weaknesses in controls, detect anomalies, investigate credible tips, and report findings so corrective action can occur. In this year's single state audit, which is a rigorous, comprehensive financial compliance audit, we identified potentially up to $4.4 billion in fraud-related exposure connected to ineligible recipients in Ohio's Medicaid programs. Our testing found an ineligible rate of 15.6%. This year's findings remain, again, highlighted the need for sustainably and substantially stronger oversight and internal controls. Today, I want to focus on two areas where our office identified significant concerns: the electronic visit verification, or the GPS system that ensures providers are where they say they are, and individuals who are enrolled in Medicaid in multiple states at the same time. Congress required EVV systems to help ensure accountability in Medicaid-funded home care services. The purpose is straightforward. Verify that services occurred, the right caregiver provided those services, and that the services occurred at the authorized time and location. Our audit found that approximately 56% of home care services were not processed through the EVV system, representing an estimated $1.1 billion of a nearly $2 billion in paid claims that were not matched with EVV visits. This is a significant control weakness. Our audit work identified problems involving incomplete or inaccurate visit data, inconsistent provider compliance, and insufficient oversight mechanisms. One important lesson from this work is that collecting large amounts of data does not automatically create accountability. Technology alone does not prevent fraud. Oversight agencies must have the staffing, analytical tools, and authority necessary to identify suspicious patterns and to act quickly when concerns emerge. Most importantly, they need to be motivated to enforce those controls. Our office has recommended stronger transparency measures, enhanced provider monitoring, and better use of predictive analytics to identify abnormal billing activity before improper payments occur in the Department of Medicaid. In fact, in March of 2024, our office released a report on concurrent enrollment, finding that more than 124,000 individuals were enrolled in Ohio Medicaid and at least one other state for 3 consecutive months. Ohio paid managed care organizations more than $1 billion associated with these enrollees. These findings highlight broader systemic challenges facing Medicaid oversight nationally, including fragmented data systems, outdated technology, delayed reporting, limited real-time monitoring capabilities, and insufficient interstate data. Too often, Medicaid oversight still operates under a pay-and-chase model where taxpayer dollars go out first and recovery efforts happen later, sometimes years later. Prevention is substantially more effective than post-payment recovery. Our office recently provided recommendations to both the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services focused on strengthening Medicaid program integrity. These recommendations including expanding predictive analytics, improving interstate data sharing, strengthening provider screening processes, enhancing transparency tools, and improving prepayment review systems. Medicaid was created to protect society's most vulnerable. Unfortunately, bad actors are abusing the system to enrich themselves. Across the country, those administering these programs have failed to protect taxpayers. Core safeguards have been compromised, removed, or simply ignored. As a result, everyday Americans are finding it harder to afford their own lives. They are subsidizing the abuse of the system. This is an affront to fiscal responsibility and rule of law. We must stop this waste, fraud, and abuse to ensure that there are resources to serve those who truly need these services, and equally important, to avoid passing on even more debt to our children and grandchildren. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to answering your questions.
So I completely agree with everything he's saying. I think he really hit it on the nail. And I like the fact that he did not just go after individuals or individual company. If we could implement what he just spoke about, that would be big for America, where people that are doing this oversight, there needs to be a more accountability on what they're doing, what they're approving, but also we do have very outdated systems. And for the amount of money that people pay in taxes, we should have the best technology in our government. We really should. And I know for a fact that a lot of these systems, like I said before, one doesn't know what the other is doing, and I believe that that does cause a lot of, it causes a lot of double payments. If you want to call it fraud, but it's really more waste because it's not deliberate fraud. And I think that we really need to define the difference as well between somebody that is deliberately deceiving and deliberately committing fraud compared to somebody that, you know, made a mistake. Maybe they forgot to cancel something or forgot to update something or filled out a form wrong. Like that should not be considered fraud if it's accidental. I want to believe that most people in this country have integrity, want to do the right thing, and I do believe that. I do believe the majority does. Unfortunately, there are a minority that knows how to work the system. And I have seen this firsthand, again, when I worked in mental health care. I would see people that knew how to work the system. They knew how to fill out forms, how much money they could actually make to still stay within the thresholds to collect money from SSDI, from Medicaid, food stamps, and whatnot. And they really devoted a lot of time and effort to be enrolled and keep these programs. I mean, it's kind of mind-blowing. If they took that initiative to become like a small business owner, they would probably be very successful, but that's just not what we're working with. There is a population that gets a lot of satisfaction in, committing fraud or, deceiving someone. But again, he's right. And nobody should be opposed to better oversight. Nobody should be opposed to better systems. better technology. But let's hear what the left has to say.
Thank you, Mr. Faber. And I now recognize Ohio Representative Michael Davila for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Gill, Ranking Member Simon, and members of the task force, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. My name is Mike Davila. I represent the 17th District in the Ohio House of Representatives. I previously served in the House from 2011 to 16, chairing the Oversight Committee and serving as Majority Whip. I've also served twice as a presidential appointee at the U.S. Office of Personnel Management and professional staff member on the Senate Governmental Affairs Committee. For more than 25 years, I've worked to increase accountability and transparency in government as a steward of taxpayer dollars. When I first served in the legislature, I opposed Medicaid expansion. I believed then, as I do now, that expanding the program without adequate safeguards places taxpayers at risk and undermines the very people it was designed to serve. Medicaid must be preserved for those who genuinely need it: low-income families, expectant mothers, seniors, individuals with disabilities who depend on a functioning safety net. But a safety net cannot work if it becomes a target for fraud, waste, and abuse. My current work on this issue began the way many legislative investigations do, with a constituent. A concerned citizen from Strongsville brought to my attention serious questions about eligibility verification within our state's Medicaid program, particularly in the aged, blind, disabled eligibility group. That concern led my office to begin asking basic questions. In April 2025, I contacted third-party vendors involved in Medicaid eligibility verification. My request was straightforward: provide information on how Ohio verifies eligibility, how data are used to detect ineligible recipients, and what happens when potential problems are identified. The responses raised more questions than they answered. One vendor reported its asset verification tool had reviewed a portion of Ohio's Medicaid ABD population and identified a significant number of individuals whose assets appeared to exceed the eligibility limits. To be clear, a data flag is not a final eligibility determination. Some assets may be exempt, and every individual deserves a proper review. But the obvious next question was, what did ODM, the Ohio Department of Medicaid, do with those flags? That is where oversight deficiencies became clear. When my office pressed ODM, the answers were unsatisfactory. The department pointed to county-level determinations and the role of the Social Security Administration. Those factors are real, but they do not relieve the state of its obligation to know whether taxpayer dollars are being spent properly. At a minimum, the state should be able to track what happens when its own eligibility systems or vendors identify potential ineligibility. If a department cannot tell legislators what happened to flag cases, cannot clearly identify why hundreds of thousands of people left the rolls, and cannot demonstrate a reliable statewide process for reconciling eligibility concerns, then we do not have program integrity. We have fragmentation. That is why in June 2025, I introduced House Bill 356. The bill required a data sharing agreement between ODM and the Auditor of State and directed a full ABD audit. As a member of the Biennial Operating Budgets Conference Committee, I was successful in inserting and retaining those provisions of my bill in the final report. While Governor DeWine used his line item veto on 67 budget items, to my surprise, he did not veto this provision, allowing the audit to become law. It is important to be candid about the nature of this work. An audit of Medicaid is not a quick exercise. It involves a large number of people, multiple data systems, sensitive personal information, eligibility categories, asset rules, county-level determinations, federal requirements, and historical records. It takes time to conduct the work properly. But the audit is essential. It is not enough to exchange letters, make public statements, and move on. We need data, verification, and corrective action. And when public funds have been improperly paid, we need recovery and consequences. Speaker Huffman recently appointed me to the Medicaid Committee of the House, where I'm working with colleagues on a comprehensive Medicaid integrity bill, including provisions to strengthen provider enrollment, improve electronic visit verification, impose additional safeguards on high-risk providers, enhance fraud reporting, and increase penalties for fraud. Our purpose is simple: verify eligibility and services, identify bad actors earlier, and ensure real consequences when people defraud taxpayers. We expect that bill to move for swift passage by next week. This should not be a partisan issue. Medicaid fraud harms taxpayers, certainly, but it also harms legitimate providers who follow the rules. It harms caseworkers and public servants whose work is undermined by weak systems. Most importantly, it harms the truly vulnerable Ohioans who depend on Medicaid and whose care is threatened when finite resources are diverted to those who do not qualify or to providers who exploit loopholes. We can have a serious debate about the size and scope of Medicaid. We can have a serious debate about the proper relationship of federal and state governments, but there should be no debate about whether government has an obligation to prevent fraud, recover misspent dollars, and protect those whom the program is intended to serve. My message today, Mr. Chairman, is simple. Medicaid is for the people who need it, not for those who have learned how to manipulate it. Oversight is not cruelty. Verification is not extremism. Accountability is not partisanship. It is the minimum taxpayers expect and the minimum our most vulnerable citizens deserve. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I look forward to answering questions and working alongside you to improve accountability and transparency in the administration of the Medicaid program for Ohio and the nation.
Thank you, Mr. Davila. Now I recognize Ohio Senator Nikki Antonio for her opening remarks. If you can turn your microphone on. Thank you.
Okay, can we start again? Thank you. Thank you, Chair Gill, Ranking Member Simon, and members of this task force for the opportunity to testify today. During my 16 years in the Ohio legislature, I have served as ranking member on the House and Senate Health Committees. I have witnessed the impact of Ohio's Medicaid program to the state's most vulnerable. It is a privilege to be a steward of hard-earned taxpayer dollars that fund our programs. Doing everything we can to prevent fraud is certainly an important part of the stewardship. In 2014, I was one of the 10 legislators appointed to the inaugural Joint Medicaid Oversight Committee, JMOC. JMOC's purpose was to provide oversight to improve the rate of spending and quality of Medicaid. JMOC proved to be true and effective to its mission when it exposed problems with pharmacy benefit managers, PBMs, who were strong-arming pharmacists and using anti-competitive business practices. As a result of JMOC's oversight, Ohio created the single PBM system currently in operation, saving Ohio Medicaid over $140 million. In 2025, this oversight committee was abolished by the Republican majority. Why? Some question the timing. JMOC was conducting an investigation into contracts with Gainwell, the nation's largest Medicaid claims processor. Coincidence? I don't know. What I do know is that Democrats in the legislature were opposed to dismantling JMOC. While Ohioans struggled to afford to put food on the table, fill their gas tank, or pay their skyrocketing utility bills, the Republican majority has continuously showed how out of touch they are. They've prioritized handouts to the wealthy and the well-connected on the backs of hardworking, everyday Ohioans. At the top of the list is the largest public corruption case in Ohio history, House Bill 6, a $61 million dark money bribery and racketeering scandal that put former Republican Speaker of the House in federal prison for 20 years. The administration has refused to pay nursing homes almost $1 billion in back pay, despite being ordered to do so by the Ohio Supreme Court. Given $1.6 billion in tax breaks, $1.4 billion more than the administration calculated, to the wealthy tech corporations to build data centers that place heavy resource burdens on local communities. Exhibit A, Republicans' one-party veto-proof rule has controlled the state for the last 15 consecutive years. They hold the House, the Senate, the governor's office, and 4 statewide offices. If there is fraud in Medicaid, it has happened on the Republican majority's watch. Perhaps it's time to clean Ohio's house. Recently, Senator Ernst opined government employees are caught with their hands in the cookie jar, abusing their positions for personal gain. Well, Ohio Republicans appear to be emulating the playbook of the White House. The President of the United States is fleecing taxpayers across the country to fight endless wars, attempting to bankroll numerous vanity projects, and tried to stick his hand in.
This has nothing to do with anything that we're talking about. And that's what's so frustrating when the Dems come on here and, it almost sounded like she had something important to share and like an aha moment. But again, it doesn't really address the fraud at hand that we're trying to discuss.
A cookie jar, a $1.8 billion cookie jar made especially for January 6th insurgents.
You guys know how I feel about that. Like, they just need to get off this J6 thing. Like, it was such a hoax on the Dem side, and they absolutely manufactured the insurrection and over-exaggerated what really happened. And I personally believe that people that had to suffer through imprisonment and getting their lives ruined because of what happened on J6 and the left agenda deserve some compensation, since their lives really were ruined.
With an unpopular Republican gubernatorial candidate in Ohio and even more out-of-touch policies, I am not surprised that we suddenly have a call for fraud reform in Ohio, Medicaid. If there is fraud, we should root it out and remedy the situation. I'm surprised that somehow the Republicans think they're not responsible, as the supervision of the Department of Medicaid has happened on their watch.
But no Republicans have come onto this hearing and said that they weren't responsible. Actually, the last person that spoke blamed the fraud on poor oversight and poor government technology. So again, what she's saying is not really valid, and it's deflecting from the actual problem. And it doesn't matter whose fault it is. Whether it happened on the left's watch or the right's watch, it still needs to be addressed, and it still needs to be fixed.
I applaud the goal of this task force, which was described, and I quote, going after institutions that stop fearing accountability and abuse the American people. We should absolutely be doing everything we can to expose and prevent fraud, use new technologies to provide oversight and accountability. These are not and should not be partisan, but should be a welcome part of any system that serves the people. Members of my caucus and I are ready to work with everyone to tackle issues of fraud, especially the abuse of taxpayer dollars, which is in essence abuse of the American people. We must maintain fiscal responsibility while ensuring that Medicaid is available to those eligible, people who are age, blind, disabled, children, and families in need. Thank you for this opportunity to testify. I will do my best to answer your questions.
So I think everyone's saying the same thing so far. Both sides want to prevent and curtail fraud. The only difference is everybody on the right that has come on to speak has said this is not a partisan issue, that we all need to be in agreement. But every time somebody from the left gets the mic, they need to blame it on the right, blame it on the Republicans, bring up Trump, bring up J6, bring up, the ballroom. And one thing has nothing to do with the other. It's a waste of time, it's a waste of energy, it's political theater that they keep bringing up these topics that are irrelevant. And then this is why nothing ever gets fixed. Everybody in this house, on this floor, should be in agreement that there is fraud happening and we need to come together. It does not matter whose fault it is, and it doesn't help anybody by pointing fingers. It just needs to be fixed. And with that, I'm going to finish the stream today. We will come back here tomorrow and finish this hearing. But thank you guys so much for joining me on this Sunday, and I will see you back tomorrow.